Hello, and you're listening to You Still Going On About That with myself, Rob Israel, and
Joseph K.
And you can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Google Play, Castbox, and Podbeam. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it. Tell your mom about it. And while you're at it, we also have a Facebook page. You Still Going On About That. Again, like it, join it, comment, share it. And thank you and enjoy. I'm Rob Israel.
I'm Joseph K.
And you still going on about
that?
Okay, so last week we discussed on our Instagram that we were going to reach a goal of a number, and we said we want 120 followers.
120 followers. Now we had been at like 100.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe less. I don't know, somewhere around there. And I said, I expect within the week 120 followers, and you said a nice gradual.
Right. I said I wanted sustained growth.
Yep. We're at 122.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if it's going to hold. We're at 122 followers.
I think it'll hold because we were creeping up day by day. And then this morning, I think we both noticed that we were at like 117 or 116, something like that. And we both put out on our stories, on our personal, hey, do us a solid, follow us.
Yeah.
And
begged.
And a former student of mine, Alberto, saw it.
Yep.
And he followed me, and I gave him a big shout out, thank you.
And my niece was in town, and we were at Baskin-Robbins, and I said to her, you better follow us. And she said, sure. I said, you don't even have to ever listen to us. I don't even care.
Right.
Just follow us.
Yes.
So that's how the sausage is made.
Yeah, right.
So now that we're 122 followers, I'm going to set a new goal.
Yes.
1 million followers by next week. Do you think we could do this?
Right. I think, here's what I think about that. I think, every once in a while you see, in the old Western shows where, someone catches a bullet with their teeth or something.
It's about the same.
They got to practice. And, maybe you lob a bullet at them underhand for the first few times.
Right.
And then eventually you're going to be like, okay, this next one's going to come a little quicker.
Usually what happens is they don't usually catch it with their teeth. Just goes through their head.
Like a William S. Burroughs thing. Okay. No, I think, as a goal next week, I'm going to say, what do you say, 130, right?
Yeah, 130.
130.
We want to be realistic. And if we get to 130, I'd say by the time we're at 150, we should be okay, we're going to now go, we want 170.
Right.
We want 190. And when we get past 200, probably just that's it. We're gonna peak there.
Growth happens exponentially.
Right.
You said, you'd started because you've been hovering around. What do you got? 90,000.
Oh, it's pretty much that account is not moving. I mean, unless someone big reposts me, it's basically pretty much going to stay in 92 land for. I don't expect it to grow. But I'm going to grow my other account.
Yeah, you had a big exponential growth, and now you're focusing on Rob Israel Geek Art.
Right. Well, like I said, it took me a year when I initially started Instagram to get to 1,000 followers, and then next year I went to 10,000, and then the year after that I went to 30, and it just kept on jumping, and now it's just kind of in a sea. I don't know. It's not going anywhere, but. Yes, so new goal, 130 followers by next week. Let's do it. Okay.
Consider it done.
So now, we were discussing what we were going to talk about this week, and you said that the Blair Witch is going to be 20 years old.
Yes.
And we were like, oh, crap. But you told me something. If you want to take over, go ahead.
Yeah. Blair Witch, it came out on Sundance, I think, in January of 99. But the 20th anniversary of the main widespread release of Blair Witch is July 14th of this year. And we always look for anniversaries, if a film has an anniversary coming up. And I said, I know a guy who worked on Blair Witch, Ben Rock, who I knew back in high school. He went to Winter Park High School, and he went to the same college I did, University of Central Florida. And he was the set designer. He had designed the little stick figure, which was kind of the iconic image of.
It just sounds funny when you say.
But he
it's like the claws of Wolverine.
Yeah, right? Well, son of a gun. That ain't a bad thing to have on your...
The bat ears of the Batman.
Well, he had done set design for that, and then afterwards had this big, long career. Like, it's rare to see a working artist. Right. Like you're a working artist, and...
Sort of.
Well, he had done a feature film, Alien Raiders, which he directed, and he's done a lot of great theater in Los Angeles at Sacred Fools Theater, which is a big respected theater. And he's always working. Right. He's done commercial work, but he's done a lot of stuff with horror. And he recently did this great, amazing podcast called Video Palace, which I absolutely love. And I said, I'll bet you if I reach out to him, I haven't spoken to him in years and years, I'll bet you he'll come on and talk with us. And son of a gun, he said yes.
He did?
Yeah, right? He's going to be here tonight.
What?
Yeah, right.
Like when?
In any minute now. Now, what we did is... In all honesty, we recorded our conversation with Ben.
No, don't ruin you're ruining the magic.
The magic? Okay.
This is just happening out of nowhere. We didn't re-record. We didn't record this before we recorded this part.
So any minute now, we're going to hop on to Zoom and speak with Ben Rock, who's graciously.
He's just been waiting during this
he's in the
whole time.
The green room.
He's in the green room, which is probably what we would call your bathroom, right?
Yeah,
the downstairs bathroom.
A foyer.
He's sitting outside. We don't let him in.
Well, he's a great guy, and I've always I remember back when I used to teach school, I would tell kids would have these crazy dreams, and most of the time. Teachers, the role of a teacher is to beat those dreams out of a kid. No, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't
go work on an Amazon fulfillment.
Right. You should
die.
You should be a drone in Sector 7. But I always used to point to my Uncle Michael, who has literally made a career playing the trombone. He's a trombonist. There's probably a better way to say that. But I would
trombonerist,
right? But I would talk about Ben Rock, and I said, Ben Rock wanted.
Is his trombone rusty?
My Uncle Michael. I don't know.
Is his trombone a rusty trombone?
My Uncle Michael. My Uncle Michael. We should have him on sometime. He's a double threat. He grew up. You know what his two jobs are?
I had no idea.
You know one of them.
One of them is a trombonist. And he also drives a train. He's a train conductor. It's like if you grew up to be a combination fireman, policeman, or something. Does he bring the trombone on the train?
That would be amazing, because I see a whole Music Man type of trouble in River City.
There's probably one day he did it, and he was never allowed to do it again.
Yeah. But that one day, huh? So anyway, but I would also point to Ben Rock, and I said, this guy wanted to work in the movies, and he did. He just did, and He makes money doing it, and it's a great thing. So we're going to invite Ben Rock onto this is our first. You still
going on about that interview? We have never interviewed anybody on. You still going on about that?
No.
So Ben is the lucky. First, he's the alpha. He's the he's the beta.
Right.
He's the beta test. He's the guinea
So
pig.
eventually, if our interviews go bad and our interview subjects go out and create chaos, a special task force will have to track Ben down, because you have to take down the original.
Right.
Okay, so
what do they call that? The X or whatever.
The vector. Patient zero.
Patient zero. That's it.
All right, so without any further ado, let's welcome Ben Rock to You Still Going On About That. Welcome, Ben. All right, and then that would be where the awkward segue would go, because we didn't totally pre-record this.
No, that's fine.
I'm just going to kind of launch into it, and I'll transition this when we get to it. But the 20th anniversary of Blair Witch is coming up on the 14th, the big domestic release. And whenever I think about that movie, we talk about movies a lot, and
it's pretty much what the podcast is about.
Yeah, it's all we talk about. And I always look at movies coming up with anniversaries, and Blair Witch came up, and I got to thinking about when Blair Witch was a thing, and it got me thinking, I don't know if Blair Witch could be a thing today, just given the way the internet's evolved, and given the way culture's evolved, and people's sensibilities have evolved. But then I listened to your podcast, Video Palace, and I thought that they're completely different. They're very different animals, very different plots, different elements. But there were some very thematic similarities between the two, in that they both dealt with folklore, and they both made use of, I don't know the right word for it, but like a conceit of sorts, where like the Blair Witch was like a found footage thing that started the whole found footage phenomenon. And there's an element of that in Video Palace, where it's almost a thing about a thing. Does any of that make sense to you? Does that?
Oh yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that on many levels, Blair Witch was the reason that I got the job to do Video Palace, and not the least of it was that it was created by a guy named Mike Manello, who was one of the producers of Blair Witch. So he has an ad agency up in New York City, and he and one of the other guys who runs the agency, like two very creative guys, came up with the idea and kind of pitched it to Shudder, and so yeah, I mean, right down to the kinds of techniques, because I didn't direct the Blair Witch Project, but I was very, very involved. I wrote Curse of the Blair Witch, which was the Sci-Fi Channel show that preceded the movie's release, and then I wrote and directed two other Blair Witch related specials, one for Showtime called The Burkittsville 7, and one called Shadow of the Blair Witch, which was on Sci-Fi Channel. It was to promote Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. And we used kind of a technique that I don't know that I invented it. I'm not going to take credit for inventing it, but I don't know anyone else who's ever used it to do all of the interviews on all of those projects. And it creates a very realistic, when you cast it well, the interviews end up sounding extremely authentic. And that was the first, like when we started talking about doing Video Palace, I kind of reached back into that I hadn't used that tool in a while. And I was like, this is the perfect thing to use that for. Because you still, like Blair Witch was very very clearly outlined by Ed and Dan, the two co-directors. And then and in the same way, Video Palace was pretty much fully scripted.
I read an interview you did not too long ago where you talked about the scripting of Video Palace, and I could be misremembering this, but you had talked about writing it out. It was like 100 and some pages, 150 some pages, and it only wound up to be about 3 hours of tape, right? Of episode quantity, and you had put some of it in italics and some of it in. Now, what was the notion behind that?
Okay, so the script, it was written by myself and Bob DeRosa, who's a guy who I collaborate with a lot. And Bob has a lot of TV writing experience as well, so that came in very handy when kind of mapping out all of the episodes. So it's 10 episodes. Each episode, I mean, like, there's not a requirement, but what Shudder wanted it to be was, between 15 and 30 minutes. It's a pretty wide range. Most of them came in around 20 minutes. And so, assuming, 1 page per minute, our final script for the whole season was about 183 pages long. The italics thing is something that I'd done on all those Blair Witch specials, which is when you're doing an interview with someone, rather than like scripting, like, when did you go to the bar? I went there at blah, blah, blah. Rather than scripting that stuff out, where no matter how well I do it, it's going to sound like either my voice or me as a writer trying to interpret like what this character is going to sound like. So what's in italics is kind of the answer that we want. Like, it would say something to the effect of, like, he talks about when he, went to the store and found the corpse in his car. Like, it doesn't specifically say what he has to do. Like, it's not word for word. And then that is kind of it becomes kind of a checklist for us when we're filming it in the case of all those specials, or recording it in the case of something like Video Palace, because we give the actors biography that we've written. The bios maybe between 1 and 3 pages long, and we kind of tell them, like, learn all the bullet points of it, but put it all in your own words. And we use it for auditions too, so we know that they can do this before they walk in the door. And then we literally interview them, and we tell them, like, it doesn't have to be exactly word for word. We don't want it to be word for word. We want it to be in your words. So, you bring in an actor like Larry Cedar, who's, a pretty amazing, humongous, awesome actor, or Joel McCrary, some of the, Kelly Holden, the people who we cast in this thing. You give them that as kind of a jumping off point, and then say, feel free to elaborate. And they do. And so what you end up getting, like, if we scripted the interview, each interview is maybe not more than 3 or 4 minutes long. So you'd have, 3 pages of interview, but instead we get like 20, 25 minutes of interview. In the case of Adam Green, we got like 35 minutes of interview. And from that, we cut it down, and even just the act of cutting it down makes it sound like a real interview. Because the tricks that you would use to kind of Frankenbite the interview, that it's the same tricks you would use if it was a real person. And I feel like all of us, as like savvy media consumers, we're kind of attuned to when we know that's going on versus when something is kind of spoon-fed to us, or contrived sounding, if that makes sense.
It does. I think one of the hallmarks of Blair Witch for me, and Rob, you can probably speak to this too, is it just felt authentic, almost creepily.
Yeah, people. So I remember seeing the first trailer for it, like, in the theater, like, I don't know, maybe like 6 months before it was coming out. I was like, theater in New York City. I was seeing like SLC Punk. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah,
I do. I remember it very well.
Starring Shaggy. Not.
Oh yeah, Lillard. Yeah, right.
Not
not the cartoon character.
Well, it's the guy who played Shaggy.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and then I remember the trailer came on, and it was all like, it was very atmospheric, and it made it look like it was this found footage movie. And I knew friends and people who really thought this was a real thing, that you guys were basically putting out a snuff film.
Yeah.
I got into arguments with people about that because they were disappointed that it was fake, and I'm like, so you would have been happier if 3 people died?
Right? Yeah. Like, first of all, you probably wouldn't legally be allowed to put that out in the theater. Yeah. I mean, I know what's his face did that years later with the what's his name, Herzog.
Oh,
with the bear.
Oh yeah, the Timothy Treadwell.
Grizzly Man.
Yeah. But that was years later. That was different. But like, yeah, I knew people who honestly thought this was like, really was a videotape that was found. And like you said, a whole bunch of people died.
Yeah. I remember when I first saw it thinking that it was either based on true. I was not ambivalent. I was very unsure about the whole thing. And I think a lot of that, to me at least, was 2 things. Well, I guess 3. One was, you could tell there's an incredible amount of backstory. And you had just alluded to that a second ago. And like a show Bible or whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
That's super clear in Video Palace, too.
I just remember the website for it, too.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was like, it was 1999, right? And I remember websites for movies were starting to get big, like, just starting to use Flash a lot, and different programs to like add animations on the site and make it atmospheric, and they had the music in there.
It's because it was. I mean, it was. Rob and I talked about it briefly before we hopped on with you. It was obviously it was much more than this, but it was such a perfect right place, right time for that.
Oh yeah, it was luck. It was so much luck went into that. Like, 5 years later, it wouldn't have worked. 5 years earlier, no one would have been on the internet. So,
right.
It was the perfect time.
Yeah.
5 years earlier, I would have been on a BBS and it would have spent like 12 hours to download like a photograph. I guess, and I purposely didn't want to spend a ton of time talking about this because all you have to do is Google your name and Blair Witch, and you've said a million things before. But that must have, I imagine that must have just been a heady time when you first, did it happen like a cannonball? Did you, I apologize, you probably answered this a million times. Did it all happen? Did you know it was happening when it was happening? Or was it only later that you realized, wow, like.
Well, I mean, the thing about it was like, all the heat on Blair Witch was, for the most part, around Ed and Dan, the two co-directors, and then I'd say secondarily around the actors. So from my point of view, it was like if you've ever seen like a movie where somebody's good friends become famous and suddenly they're on the Tonight Show and they're on the cover of Time magazine and they're on, that I kind of lived that montage, like these goofballs that I went to college with. I've known Greg Hale since 1991. And like suddenly, even though I was a big part of it, I wasn't part of at the time, I wasn't part of the story anybody wanted to talk about. Because my credit was production designer. And honestly, I feel like movies are lucky when they get, when there's one director who gets anyone to talk about it. This one had two, which is, it was a lot, but like I was extremely fortunate that it kind of got my directing career off the ground at the time. So I was able to kind of get my foot in the door doing what I wanted to do as a result of having worked on this film. As far as like when we worked on it, people ask sometimes if like if we had any idea it was going to be what it was. And it's like, if we did, we would have second guessed our every move and completely fucked it up, I'm sure. Like if we had any inkling that it had even a chance of being that, like we thought we were making a film that might play film festivals or might, get a home video release if we were very lucky.
Right.
And I had already at that point in my very, very early career, I had, worked on a bunch of movies in the Southeast, a lot of them for this director named David Pryor in Mobile, Alabama. And those movies had, not great budgets, but from where I was sitting, pretty big budgets. They were shooting on 35 millimeter film. We had a full crew. We'd shoot for, 6-8 weeks. I was a makeup artist on them, usually special effects makeup, but sometimes regular makeup. And those movies kind of just went straight to video and died. Like they never became part of the conversation. So I sort of feel like I just thought Blair Witch sounded like a really cool project and I wanted to work on it. And I wasn't, if I had been more plotting, maybe I would have angled for a different credit than the one I took or something. But honestly, it was just something that sounded like a lot of fun. And I had no expectations because it was one of those, it's just so crazy it might work kind of ideas. But there's only about a million ways it could have not worked. It really could have gone off the rails a lot of other ways.
Yeah. Oh, did you continue after you did Blair Witch? You had done the previous stuff on Sci-Fi. Did you continue on with the series afterwards?
Like the second movie or?
No. I mean, honestly, I was around for the second movie a little bit because I was doing a TV special for it. And also they'd hired me at the time to kind of compile the Bible, the official Bible of the whole Blair Witch mythology.
Were they?
So,
sorry, I know I could probably easily, again, we could Google Wikipedia this, but Blair Witch 2, because it is literally like a movie versus the first one. It does come out a year later. I was like, I forgot. It really came out like literally the next summer. Unfortunately, it was not the same.
It was, lightning in a bottle.
Was it the creator's decision to make it a film, or did the studio totally take that over?
No, and none of us, literally none of us worked on the sequel. Because I was doing the TV special, I got to go to the set of the sequel. Which was freaky enough, but none of us worked on it. And Ed and Dan both were. I mean, it wasn't just Ed and Dan. All the guys from Haxon Films, which was the company that made the first one, all including Mike Manello, the guy who co-created Video Palace, they were all very against the direction that Artisan wanted to go in. And what they wanted to do, I think seemed crazy at the time and now seems like a much better idea. And it would have been another movie. It wouldn't have been another found footage movie, but the idea would have been to tell the origin story. So to make, basically, I don't know if you saw The Witch, the movie that came out a few years ago.
In the 2016 one?
Yeah, not Blair Witch, but The Witch.
Right.
Yeah, I heard of that. Yeah. I didn't see it though.
It's brilliant. So I think that movie is very similar to kind of what Ed and Dan had in mind, which is to tell like a colonial era, supernatural story. And I have my own ideas about like what I would ever do if they let me get my mitts on that. But but that was what they wanted to do. But they also had another movie that they wanted to make that Artisan had even agreed to release, and they had a budget. Like they were all set to do it, and they were going to go do that before they would even consider doing a sequel. And Artisan said, well, we want it out next. It came out in October. So the first movie came out in July of 1999, and the sequel came out in October of 2000.
Right.
And they fucking cranked it out. I'm sorry if I have a potty mouth.
No. Oh my God! You're good, man.
No,
they
they cranked it out, and like I know there are a lot of people online who kind of are apologists for Blair Witch 2, and I sort of feel like if you like Blair Witch 2, I'm not going to tell you not to like it. But my opinion of it is that it really never had much of a chance because they greenlit it in like January, and it was in theaters that October. Wow. They didn't. When the first movie came out, I feel like before all the Haxan guys became, like had more money than they'd ever had in their lives, and could be choosy. Like the week Blair Witch came out, if Artisan had cornered them and said, we want you to make a sequel, and got them in a contract, they could have done that. But instead they waited until January after the movie was already a giant hit and kind of the wave had already crested. And Joe Berlinger tells the story of kind of how he got basically hornswoggled into doing it. He didn't like the first movie, and I think that's telling, because Joe Berlinger is an amazing filmmaker, and his documentary work is some of the best that's ever been. And I have nothing bad to say about his entire body of work except Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. And I don't think it's just because he kind of wiped his ass with a mythology that I worked really hard to create, even though like I was 26. Like, what the hell did I know? But I just kind of feel like the studio set up an impossible road to success for that by just not giving it enough time. And they also, I feel strongly that like, and this is changing maybe, but there was a time, and it was most of the time that the entertainment business has been around, where people think horror movies are for like debauched 15-year-old boys who will one day be serial killers, and so they aim everything at that. So like the edict on Blair Witch 2 was like tits and gore, and it's like, how much tits and gore were in the first one? Like, don't.
Well, that was the problem.
It's a reductive way to look at it, and yes. We talk now like with Jordan Peele kind of killing it as much as he is. There's all this talk about elevated horror, but it's like, there've always been shitty horror movies. There's always been great horror movies. There've always been classy ones, and there've always been, grungy ones. And, I like a wide variety. I'm a huge horror fan. So, I can get involved. I can watch a lot of them, and like every other genre of everything, music and movies and books, most movies suck. So,
I just think
axiomatic, but anyway, I just kind of stand in opposition to that point of view that like we need to make horror movies full of tits and gore because we're trying to conjure this mythological, non-existent 15-year-old disturbed, not very intelligent boy.
Oh, they exist. They're out there. But the thing
sure.
is, I think
that's not the horror audience, though. The horror audience,
right.
Like actually, statistics show the horror audience is primarily women. And like, I mean, like I'm
exactly.
I'm deeply into the horror community, and it's like the people who are in that community are wonderful, loving, sweet, funny people. They're not people who want to like go to a slaughterhouse and watch animals get murdered.
No,
that's not what we like about it.
I do some horror conventions because my artwork that I do geared more in that direction, and usually those are my most successful shows. I feel like the people that go to horror, like any type of horror things, like one, they're a little older usually.
Exactly.
They make money. They're very like passionate about the things that they like, and they're willing to pay for it. Like, but what I was going to say about the second movie, which I always found funny, even when they first announced it. I'm talking about like they first announced it like early that year, 2000. They were going to make one, and it was going to be live action. And right off the bat, it made no sense. It was like, okay, well, the thing that made the first movie great, I mean, you could just take the name off and call it something else, and it still would have been good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what you guys did in that first movie is the reason why it was successful. And so the studio, like you said, taking it over, taking control of it, taking the wheel. They're the ones who crashed the car, basically.
Well, I don't think anyone knew what it was, to be honest. I mean, my layperson's opinion is it was such a unique, it was an anomaly.
Right.
You know, I mean, nothing about it should have worked on paper, but it did. And it kind of, anytime you talk about something capturing the zeitgeist, it's hard to define.
But for as a follow-up to say, okay, well, now we're going to follow up next year, which was something that even with the audience, like everyone I knew thought it looked like, you know, it was going to be like not as good as the first one, because it wasn't what the first one was.
It was a departure.
I mean, it was too far away. I mean, just from the trailers, it didn't make any sense. It was just like poor judgment and like too quick of a cash grab. I like, you know, like you said, going back and it's like, okay, now you have this thing and it's a mystery. Well, and then you go back to the time where the origin of the Blair Witch.
But I was talking to Mike Manello about this very thing when we were working on Video Palace, and I was like, man, if they'd only gone for it. He's like, they were never going to go for that. They had like, and I remember at the time that this is so wonky of a story to tell, but Artisan was preparing for an IPO, and so all those people were like, we're going to get rich because we're going to show that we can make a movie that's a hit movie. Because up until then, they'd only acquired movies that had even made a dent. They'd not made their own movies. And post Blair Witch, they suddenly found themselves with a lot of money, and they made a bunch of movies, and none of them were a hit. And a lot of them are even kind of beloved movies today, but none of them really found the audience. And I couldn't tell you why, but you know, I do feel like it was what it looked like. It was a cash grab, and I feel like there are examples of movies that get made like that turn out well. So, you know, and I kind of write off Joe Berlinger going along with it and doing it like that. He wanted to move into narrative films, and I think that he told himself, if I do this, I'll figure out a way to make it work. And I think, and you know, as a filmmaker, I tell myself that on every fucking project I ever work on Video Palace. I told myself that because, you know, Video Palace, I was hired, we started early June last year, and it had to be finished in September. That's an insane turnaround. And there was no script. Bob and I had to write the whole script. So we had to like write it, get the script approved, cast it, get the casting approved, record it, get all of that stuff approved, because this is all going through Shudder. And, you know, their approval process isn't onerous. It's just, it takes time like anything else, and get it all, you know, edited and sound designed and all that stuff. And, you know, we were kind of swinging for the, you know, we were, it was a big swing. It was a big idea. And we're like, I don't know if we can make it, you know. Also the budget wasn't especially high, but, you know, but it was such a cool idea. And I'd wanted to work for Shudder for years. So I was excited to do it. But I feel like that's what happens. You know, like in that instance, that one worked out. In the instance of Blair Witch 2, like the stars didn't align. It was, you know, bad chemistry or whatever reasoning, for whatever reason, it didn't work. And I was, even though I hated the concept of it, I was still rooting for it myself.
Well, yeah, you want it to succeed. I mean, you don't want it to fail.
Yeah.
Now I know they made a new one in 16.
Yeah. Blair Witch.
Were you involved with that or?
Nope. None of us were.
Not even the creators, huh? That's
Ed and Dan got executive producer credit on it, and they were involved in some of the marketing of it, but I don't know. Well, one thing I do know is that because the people who worked on it told me this, apparently the NDA that everyone who worked on it had to sign was just banana pants. So Dan or Ed might have worked on it a little bit, but like Adam Wingard was a perfect choice to direct it. He's an amazing filmmaker, and his writing partner Simon Barrett, same thing. But yeah, none of us worked on it. I certainly didn't work on it. I found out that it existed after it had already been shot, and a friend of mine who's a horror filmmaker kind of told me on the DL, because he knew Adam Wingard. He's like, hey, you know, they already made a Blair Witch sequel, and I'm like, what? Because that was probably the first Blair Witch related anything that, like, I didn't even consult on, or, they didn't ask for my feedback on the script or anything. And then there's a new video game, which literally none of us worked on in any way. And none of us even knew it existed until a trailer dropped. And I'm like, come on, guys, whatever.
I remember someone on your Facebook page asking if you were going to get royalties for the stick figure. And
yeah,
and then you're just like, no, that's not how that works.
No, that was the work for hire. I don't make any money.
I mean, it'd be awesome, right?
Yeah, it would be cool. I read this in an interview with you that you had done a while back. I never really considered you as a horror, as that being your genre. I know you had done Alien Raiders, which I always chalked up as a sci-fi. It had some horror elements in it, or some suspense elements. But then I looked at like the other things you did, and Ball that you did at Sacred Fools, absolutely horror in a strange sense of the word. And even and I was, you've kind of lived like a just this stellar professional life, in my opinion, because you did Sirens of Titan, and I'm a huge Vonnegut fan. And although that's kind of a comedy of sorts, there's absolutely some horror elements in there.
Well,
I mean, you don't have to go.
Moreover, I mean, so that's a live stage play. The adaptation was done by Stuart Gordon, who's probably best known as the writer-director of Reanimator. He did the adaptation, and he did it in the 70s, and Vonnegut helped him with that adaptation.
Jeez.
And I know Stuart. He lives. It's crazy to me because he's like one of my actual heroes. But he lives like 3 miles from my house, and he helped us a lot with that. And in fact, he even revised the script.
Huh. Well, because we had talked about Reanimator right before you came in, and I was trying to. We were talking about some of the movies that may have inspired Video Palace to some extent. I know From Beyond, not Reanimator, but there's definitely elements of that in there. And anyway, the more I thought about it, the more a lot of the stuff you've worked on does have a horror element, whether it's a genre horror like you'd expect a horror movie to be, or whether it's the horror that you'd find in like a Slaughterhouse-Five type of Vonnegut situation. Is that your thing? Are you a horror? I mean, not to limit yourself, but
no, I mean nobody. If you told me that I could only make horror movies for the rest of my life, but I'd get to make them, that would be the best news I ever got in my life. I love horror movies, and I always have. Like when I met you when we were in high school, like that was my jam back then. I remember always our mutual friend Darren Fishback.
Yeah.
Like Darren like could not stomach all the horror movies. Like that was where he and I very much parted ways taste wise. It's like, I mean, I have a wide range of tastes, but I feel like I'm a worrisome, stressed out person, and horror movies allow me to have some kind of a catharsis, an escape valve. And so I've always been like since I was 9 or 10 years old, horror was like definitely my thing, and I definitely went down a horror nerd hole when I was in high school. And it wasn't like today where you can go on Facebook and find all of your brethren, but it's like I was the weird kid on the school bus reading Fangoria magazine and and all that stuff. And it really is awesome to get to work with somebody like Stuart Gordon, for instance, because not only is Stuart's like he excels at a lot of things that I'm excited about. He was a groundbreaking theater director in Chicago in the 60s and 70s. He, in fact, he directed the first professional production of a David Mamet play.
Oh, wow.
He worked with Roald Dahl. He worked with wow. I want to say Ray Bradbury. He worked with Kurt Vonnegut. Like he worked with all these people, and he founded the Organic Theater. So like the Sirens of Titan production that I did in its original run, Dennis Franz and Joe Mantegna were in the cast.
Oh, jeez.
Some minor names. Yeah. All these names you've been mentioning are all minor, very small. No one's really ever heard of any of these people. It's crazy.
So Stuart went from that to be like, like one of the most amazing horror filmmakers of, the 80s. And, he hasn't directed a movie, I think, since like 2006 or 2007, I think. I hope he does again. I actually met him because I produced a play called Taste that he directed, and that is definitely one of my favorite theater productions I've ever been any part of. And
I'm not
he's
familiar
just
with that.
well, it's not a big play. It's not an adaptation of anything else. It's sort of it's based on a true news story from probably like 15 years ago about this guy who put an ad on the internet looking for someone who could murder, who would let them murder and eat them.
Yes,
and a guy
I remember this.
and someone replied. It was in Germany. So this guy named Benjamin Brand adapted the story to the stage, and he said it in an American city. I mean, I don't think we ever say out loud, but like New York, and it's basically a 2-person play. And the centerpiece of the stage is a real working kitchen. We had to have like a working grill and stuff like that because they cook stuff and they eat it, and sometimes it's meat.
I have, this is...
I was looking through that, sorry, I was looking through that guy's list of movies.
Oh, with the Reanimator?
Yeah.
Reanimator was such an amazing...
But then I see like tons of movies that I've seen. Robot Jocks, Dolls, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
He wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And
okay, I'm like, I knew he didn't direct it because I remember the other. Do you know the guy who directed it? Because I remember him. I swear it was a guy who did like Mom and Dad Save the Earth or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I don't know the director.
I have an odd and I want to ask it now, or I'll forget to ask it. In Video Palace, was the decision to set it in New York based off that, the ad agency being based out of New York? I always was just kind of curious why it was set in New York and Vermont, because it had such a sense of place. You mentioned bridges and different things and was
I mean, I'm not a New Yorkie person. I think been to New York 5 times in my entire life. I've been to Mobile, Alabama a lot more than I've been to New York. But yeah, Mike and Nick both live in New York, and I think that the idea started there, but it felt sort of New Yorky. Like there's kind of that hipstery kind of, it's not there anymore, but like Kim's Video and stuff like that.
I love that place.
And so. Yeah, like originally in the original script, when we were interviewing the experts in the first episode, one of them was going to be a dude from Kim's Video, but we weren't able to track that person down, I think. And although we did talk to Sam Zimmerman, who also is based in New York. Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes from that. And as a non-New Yorkie person, I didn't like have a map of New York City hanging in front of me, but I did have to say a lot like, okay, so if you're going from Brooklyn to Staten Island, how would you do it? And then, go online and, do whatever research and then be like, okay, well, how can I make that part of the story?
There's a lot of people in New York that have lived there probably 40 years who still haven't figured that out. That's not a joke. That's not a joke.
Okay, I have 2 more questions about this that are kind of fanboyish. The second one, this is like such a rare opportunity for me to have listened to something and loved it, and then actually get to ask questions. The second one was who did the music for that, because it was amazing.
His name is Michael Tioli, and he's awesome. He also did the music for my play version of the Sirens of Titan.
Oh, okay.
And if you go on iTunes, you can actually find the soundtrack, or Apple Music, whatever it is now, and I think on Spotify and all that. Like he just uploaded it, so you can like listen to this psychedelic ass music that he made for the Sirens of Titan. And we actually made like a random reference to Kat, who's the character within it,
right?
Who is supposed to be the composer, and that she has a band called Cathars for Catholics on SoundCloud, and we set up a SoundCloud and put our whole soundtrack up there under that.
Okay.
I don't know. I have no idea how many people have gone to that, but when we were writing it, we were always trying to think like, how could we kind of blur the line a little bit, do stuff like that.
Well, I genuinely wondered if the actress who played Kat, and I know the actress's name isn't Kat, so I kind of quickly deduced that it wasn't her. I had wondered briefly if she had composed the music. It's this great John Carpenter-ish kind of soundtrack. It's really, really great. And then the last one is, when you interviewed, there's a whole bunch of blurbs, like in the second, third episode, where you interviewed like luminaries in the film world and the horror world. Were those real people?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and so like when you said, we're going to talk to the guy Shudder or Fangoria, that was someone.
Yeah, that's all in the first episode. Like Adam Green, who went on there. He's a really well-known horror filmmaker. He made the Hatchet movies, and he has a TV show called Holliston. And Adam's a friend of mine. And Adam, because of Adam, like again, we needed like 3 minutes of material. Adam gave us like 35 minutes of material, and so I went to Shudder and I said, hey, you know, like if I cut extended versions of just these interviews, could we release them as bonus episodes? And they were like, fuck yeah. And so they're all only on Shudder. Bob and I, the guy who I created who I co-wrote Video Palace with, he and I co-created a web series called 20 Seconds to Live, and Adam's YSGOAT.com, his production company, basically released the first season. So
cool. All right, I got one more question, and then we'll see if we have any more. But who's making good horror now?
I mean, I basically I had a baby. Everyone says when you have a baby, you can forget about going to the movies. And the last movie I think I saw before he was born was A Quiet Place. I think the short answer is comedians are making amazing horror. What the hell? Well, and Alicia went with me, and she was like, 8 months pregnant and change. But it's John Krasinski. Him, Jordan Peele, obviously. I'm really looking forward to Ari Aster's new movie, Midsummer. I didn't get to see that. I didn't get to see Hereditary in the theater, but I did see it the second it dropped on Amazon Prime. I mean, I have a bigger theory, and I don't want to like rankle any political nerves. But here, strap in. I hope I don't piss anyone off.
No, we go political.
I believe, and I did a spreadsheet of this once. I can't find the spreadsheet, or I would share it with you.
I'm already offended.
I believe that horror films are better when Republicans are in charge, and
that's probably true.
And I think it's because whether you're Republican or not, I think that like they tend to run on fear, and the sole exception is George H.W. Bush, who was like as scary as a bowl of tapioca pudding, But I feel like
you did have the Iraq War under him too.
You had Project Operation Desert Storm for sure. But his son up the
his son was yeah.
And I mean, like, I'm not obviously the first person to point out, like, the parallel between Abu Ghraib and all the torture porn of the aughts, all the Rob Zombies and the James Wans and the Eli Roth kind of movies. But I think, even if you go back to the 80s, we've got
best horror movies in the 80s.
8 years of Reagan, and I grew up in the 80s. Yeah, but I mean, like, you've got all of your Nightmare on Elm Streets. You've got many of your Friday the 13ths. You've got stuff like Reanimator. Like, horror movies were kind of really kicking it in the 80s, and we're living under the threat of the Cold War. And I feel like the 90s are kind of a dead zone. I mean, you have good movies. I mean, there's definitely like Islands in the Storm movies like Candyman or whatever that kind of show up in the 90s. But it really isn't until we get to the aughts that they start kicking in. And then during the Obama years, not real, like great horror movies like The Witch don't get purchased with an audience. And I feel like last year, we had a remake of Suspiria, a new Halloween movie. We had A Quiet Place. We had we had Hereditary. Like
and we have an actual president that's a horror movie itself.
No, that's true. Well, I do feel like, I feel like I would almost say it starts with Get Out, which again, Get Out is a really well-made movie, and I loved it, and I'm really glad it exists. But I think if it had come out 2 years earlier, I don't know that it would have been a massive runaway hit, because the audience was so freaked out by racist shit. And I think that a horror movie that came along and satirized that properly as it did, was exactly what an audience wanted at that exact moment. Kind of like you're saying, Blair Witch was the right thing for the internet. Get Out was, I think, the right thing for the beginning of the Trump administration. Yeah. And, us and all that. Like, I love how much Jordan Peele obviously just loves the fuck out of horror movies. And I never would have guessed that he was going to become one of the greats, but he definitely is up there.
Well, it's funny you said this, because, I mean, man, we could do like, I could go on now for like 3 hours on the subject of how sometimes the best art, music, and like horror and all that stuff, unfortunately, comes out when the shittiest people are running the country. I mean, it's not a joke. And people, like, we've lived this cycle and we've seen it. Like you said, you saw some of the best horror movies with Reagan, like They Live, which comes out literally like the last year of Reagan's presidency. Yeah, you're right. George Herbert Walker Bush, he was almost like the Wafferment of the diarrhea bowl that everyone ate with Reagan for years. And then, Clinton was the pacifier after that. And then you had George W. Bush, which was a fucking nightmare in itself. Yeah. And now it's so bad now. People have a false nostalgia for George W. Bush. I always laugh when they're like, I wish he was president. I take no way. I will take Trump over George W. Bush. George W. Bush was the worst person ever. And I know we could argue about that. Trump is a nightmare. George, we haven't had 2 buildings fall yet under him, when we get to that point. But when he won the presidency, which I almost had I had the worst acid reflux that night. Like I couldn't sleep, and I remember he won at 2 a.m. And I just remember people were like, hey man, it sucks he won, but man, we're going to get really good art in the next couple of years. And I'm like, you know what, man? Yeah. I'll gladly pass off that good art, A lot of people are going to die.
I'd rather be relatively inept at art myself. But yeah, I was on a shoot the day of the election. And I learned my lesson, which is don't ever schedule a shoot for election day anyway, because no one's head is in the game that whole day. Yeah. But it was like you could feel the morale breaking down slowly over the course of that shoot, because early in the day it was like, oh yeah, hey, let's watch the horse race, but we all know who's gonna win. Ha, ha, ha. And then by the end of the day, we're all just crying. We're I remember after the shoot was over, it was like a half day pickup day kind of a shoot. I went to this place called California Chicken Cafe, and I just sat there in numb silence eating a salad, being like, what the hell just happened? And you know what? All of my hopes and dreams for that day seem to have come true. So, but
I mean, it's an unfortunate thing. I mean, if you look at those 8 years of Reagan, man, some of the best comic books came out in that time period. Yeah. Some of the best horror movies, some of the best. Yeah. I mean, just movies in general. I'm sorry.
It doesn't even qualify as a silver lining, but I guess
Well, it's not a silver lining. It's just. It shows, though, that there is a reaction, at least. There's a cultural reaction, and hopefully within those 8 years, with that reaction, maybe people will be smarter and vote better. But then the problem is people get pacified for 8 years or 4 years, hopefully 8 years, and then the cycle starts again. Yeah. And it's ridiculous. It's almost like makes you think and again, this could be a whole other subject about elections. I mean, he didn't even win this election. That's it's getting to the point now where George Bush didn't win that election. The Supreme Court gave it to him. It was proven that if Al Gore stuck with it, George Bush would have lost that election. And then this election, you got a guy sitting in there who lost by 3 million votes. So I always say, no, the majority of people do not like this guy. Yeah. It's just we have a screwed up system that allowed him to get in. But man, hopefully we get some good art out of that, right, man? Get some good horror movies in there.
Hopefully we all live through it long enough to.
Right, exactly.
Do you have any? And this will be our last one, and then we'll let you get some treasured sleep before the cycle begins. And do you have any plans? I mean, 20th anniversary of Blair Witch. It's kind of like this big. Iconic. It's become an iconic film. The imagery is iconic. Are there any plans for the 20th anniversary?
Well, there's already been a couple of things that happened. I went to Sundance back in January, and they had a 20th anniversary screening of it there, and I participated in Q&A there. And then the Florida Film Festival, which Blair Witch would not exist without the Florida Film Festival and its sponsor theater, the Enzion Theater. And it's many long stories about why that is, but that movie just wouldn't exist in the form that it existed in if it weren't for that, for 1,000 reasons. And a few of them were that I was working there and Mike Manello was working there, and Dan Myrick was shooting video for the Florida Film Festival and met John Pearson there, and John Pearson put the sizzle reel that we made on his show Split Screen, and that's what inspired the website. Like, you know, it goes like that. So anyway, in April, Florida flew us all out. I didn't get fancily flown out to Sundance. I had to make my own way there. But Sundance flew us all out and put us all up and did a big Q&A screening. They even had the actors. Heather wasn't there, but Mike and Josh were there. Heather, I think Heather's had enough and doesn't want to do Blair Witch events anymore.
I can see that. That's understandable.
Well, I mean, some people, they want to separate themselves, and
that's all good. Yeah.
I'm friends with Heather on Facebook. She's awesome. She's a wonderful person. She's not like trying to duck out of society. I think she just had said everything she ever wanted to say about Blair Witch and kind of wants to go on with her life without it all the time, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, the Enzion was just that was a great venue. I remember seeing film after film there. And that was a huge part of my Orlando experience.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was saying, do you think there's a chance in any way that there could be a resurgence for the Blair Witch in some form down the line?
Well, they're about to release a video game. We'll see if the video game gets traction. I mean, I'm annoyed that no one asked me to consult on it, but it actually looks badass. So, you know, they probably didn't need my consultation.
What's the company?
I don't remember.
I mean, it doesn't even matter.
It has some name like Google Box or something that doesn't mean anything to me. So, but it looks great. If you look up the trailer, the video game looks amazing. I was only annoyed that like Lionsgate or someone said like this video game is canon, and I'm like, says who?
Says the guy in the marketing department of the video game.
I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad or great or terrible. I don't know anything about it. I haven't played it. I don't know it, but it's like, you know, it's a video game. You know, like if you make a Star Trek video game, you're like, this is canon.
Right.
Sure, why not?
You know, we talk about that on the podcast, like how movies and like they'll make a sequel and they'll say like none of the movies before counted. And then, 3 years later, they'll do it again and say, "No, this is actually the direct sequel to the first one." And the other ones.
I like Halloween, but like you have to use some pretty complicated.
It's insane.
Format to figure out which Halloween is a sequel to what anymore, and it's crazy. Right. And now they're making another Halloween 2. And I'm like, it's the third Halloween too.
We talk about Terminator. You know, there's a new one coming out. And so you had 1, 2, then you had 3. And then the fourth one was like a weird prequel. And then 5 was this bizarre reimagining. And now the new one's coming out. And it's saying, no, nothing else happened after 2. Those other 3 movies don't exist. And now but what I can't wait for is the movie after that one. That says that 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, none of those happened, and this is the only one.
Somebody should make a straight sequel to Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, the only one that Michael Myers isn't in. I should make Halloween 3 too.
That's a good idea. Honestly, I'm surprised. Well, the funny thing is, we were talking about Blair Witch 2 earlier, and how it does stray away from the original, and I was going to bring up Halloween 3 because they wanted to do like an anthology series, right? That was like their goal, and each Halloween movie would be just another.
That was John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's original idea, from what I understand. Yeah.
Oh. Then when that kid put that pumpkin head on his face, and then that song came on, that game gave me freaking nightmares. I saw that when I was little.
That movie creeped the shit out of me as a kid, for sure. Yeah, that movie scared me more than the original Halloween. I know that doesn't.
Yes, it is a scary movie. Huh. I never found Halloween scary.
It felt like I never felt like Michael Myers was going to come to my house, but I was really creeped out by the idea that I could put a Halloween mask on and it would melt my face.
You know what? And again, Reagan was president. I'm sure the regulations on masks weren't that high back then. It was very believable.
Halloween during the Reagan administration, people don't really remember this, but during the Reagan administrations, a Halloween mask was actually considered a vegetable in your school lunch.
Yeah, that's right.
Just polyurethane soaked in oil. Oh, that's true. Well, that sounds like a good horror way to end our Do you have any? Now, I'll tell you, we are huge. Our podcast is huge in the Czech Republic. We routinely do very well there. Do you have any?
Thank you to everyone in the Czech Republic, first of all.
Do you have any new projects or anything on the horizon you'd like to put out there?
The biggest thing to look for, and we're probably going to be releasing it at the end of the summer, is 20 Seconds to Live Season 2. So it's all an anthology. So nothing. There's one episode that vaguely connects to another episode, but really most of them are just original one-offs. And one of our we have a couple of bigger names. One of them you probably know in person, and that's Billy Gardell is in one of our new episodes.
Wow.
From Mike and Molly, Jonathan Mangum, who is he's on Whose Line Is It Anyway, and he's on Let's Make a Deal, and he does tons of movies and stuff. He's in one episode, and Devin Siddell, who plays Tamara in Video Palace, is in one of them.
Oh, cool! Right
Nice.
on. Any thoughts on a follow-up, either a direct follow-up or something similar to a Video Palace type of deal?
We would love to do a season 2 of Video Palace, and we are still currently waiting for Shudder to give us the thumbs up or thumbs down. So cool. We originally thought we would have it out before the 1-year anniversary of the first one, and then we were like, maybe we can have it out on that anniversary. And now we're like, it would have to be like, there's no way if we started now, it would be done in October. And then Bob and I also, like, I can't really go into too much detail, but because of Video Palace, we were able to develop a project for Audible that's another horror thing. So
cool.
So we a weird lateral drift for me into audio production, thing I have literally no formal training in.
Well, I'll tell you, and again, I read another, I can't remember if it was the same interview or a different one, where you talked about podcasting and audio dramas as being kind of a great way or an inexpensive way for a studio to kind of kick the tires on what might eventually become a film project. But that Video Palace was done so well, and it was so intentional. And I recall you talking about how you used the microphone or the recorder almost as another character, and it really shows.
Totally.
As someone who has like amateur podcasting experience, and I edit it and I put it together. Every beat of that was just done so well, and even the things like when I first heard it, I was like, wow, the audio quality on that, it's like, but then you're like, oh, he's podcasting, and it was note for note wonderful. I couldn't recommend that enough.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Well, Ben Rock, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm Joseph K.
I'm Rob Israel, and I'm sure you have some advice for people you want to give everybody.
Maybe. I mean, I think the best advice is get out there and make stuff. If you want, I mean, like I have been talking to a lot of people, a lot of filmmaker friends of mine about like make a podcast, because like we had a meager budget, but we did have a budget. But if we didn't have a budget at all, let's pretend we had to do it on our own. We probably could have pulled most of it off for not very much. I mean, like, everyone was paid, but if you could get your actor friends together to do it, like we had a good recording studio that we worked in, but you could have done it in a relatively empty living room or whatever. Like there's a lot of ways you can skin that cat. Audio wise, and honestly, the main audio recording device that we used was the one Mark Cambria is supposed to be is the one he would use to record a podcast. It's called a Zoom H4n. Yeah. You can buy it for $200 right now. You probably get a used one for $100, and they're great, and they have microphones built in. And we did fancy miking on everyone, and then for I'd say 80% of the whole thing, it's just that Zoom, him holding it and pointing it around. And the voiceover stuff was the only one that was done with a real professional mic. But even that, you don't have to. There's no rules to audio, and publishing a podcast is like the actual publishing of it, dirt cheap, So it's one of those weird things where it's like being in the early days of YouTube, where if you have an idea that's interesting enough, and you have a way to execute it that's specific to you, you can build an audience off of it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. You will spend time editing it, but so what? What's any of our time worth? when you're working on your own projects, and to me that's, there's a movie that I saw a trailer for recently. I think it's called Headhunter, and I think it's Danish or something. Supposedly it was made with a crew of 4, and I watched the trailer, and the trailer looks amazing. And it's like, it's just one by one, the barriers to entry go away. And the downside of that means that there's a lot more material to compete against. But the upside, of course, is that, the more people get in and create stuff, the easier it is. If you take away all the barriers to entry, then we're going to find new people who never would have gotten a chance if they had to go pitch their thing to a studio and raise millions of dollars to do it. And Video Palace is one of those ideas where if we'd had to go out and raise millions of dollars to do it, probably never would have got made. And the web series Bob and I do, 20 Seconds to Live, we did it out of sheer frustration. It was like we want to be making stuff. I'm sick of taking meetings about meetings, and then everything fizzles, and the company you were going to go work for goes out of business, and everything falls apart. And it was like, fuck it, let's just go make something. And I feel like we're living in an era where fuck it, let's go make something actually is a valid way to get shit done. And it's not there are plenty of people who get big careers and get discovered off of podcasts. Not that that's a reason to do it. It's a terrible reason to do it, but it's not science fiction to say that you make a podcast and you can point to a number of things. Maron, the TV series, never would have existed if Mark Maron wasn't doing his podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Comedy Bang Bang. I mean, there's a lot of them, and then you get to stuff like Homecoming, which was a Gimlet podcast, and they got a TV deal out of it on Amazon with Julia Roberts. I mean, to me,
that was a great show.
The thing is just respect the medium that you're in, whatever it is. Don't try and make a podcast be a movie. Let a podcast be a podcast, and use it as an example of that. And I don't know. I mean, to me, that's it. It's more fun the more stuff you get to make, and it's less fun the more you sit around thinking about making stuff and don't do anything, which is what most people do.
Yeah, that's real true. The hardest part is just doing it. Once you do it, things fall in place. There's always a million reasons not to start a podcast or not to, sit down and do art. That's good advice. Yeah. All right.
Also, vaccinate your kids.
And vaccinate your kids.
Please vaccinate all your children.
All right. Well, thanks so much, man. I'm going to clumsily try to figure out how to turn this off. And that'll be that.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, man. It's great to see you.
Thanks so much. I'll be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great talking to you.
Bye.
Well, that went well, I think.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm super grateful for the time. I told him going into it, look, we're only going to take 20 minutes, half hour of your time at most, and he gave us an hour. It was a really cool conversation.
Yeah, it was very informative. Definitely someone who shows, he knows what he's talking about. That's good.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, I guess I never really think about it because you and I talk about movies like this all the time with love and affection, and we give them respect and whatnot. And it's not something I go to a bank and talk about Herbert West Reanimator, to the teller.
I do all the time. They're like, sir, get out.
Sir, we've talked to you about this. But it's kind of cool to talk to someone who's in the medium or whatnot and has a great love and affection to it. I mean, that's kind of what the fandom, I mean, that sounds kind of like a weird way of putting it. But that's what people who love the genre.
And again, it's just, it's interesting to talk to somebody who actually worked on something we would talk about. We probably would have done a full... I'm glad that, we could we have done a full episode on Blair Witch? I think we would have done, discussed it and then brought up lots of other things about, because so many things spawned out of Blair Witch. And that's why, when I brought it up to him about the second movie, I always found it interesting. Why would they do this? Why didn't they just try to make another found footage? Because there were so many other found footage movies that came after that took the ball and went somewhere else with it, like Chronicle, Troll Hunters, another one. That's a foreign one. They were supposed to make an American version. I don't know what happened to that.
Well, even there's a bunch of found footage movies that came
Cloverfield,
right after that.
Which obviously is, bigger budget, but even though. So I always found that it was good to talk about that and realize that the studio just got greedy and like kind of
Yeah.
pushed the people who actually cared about it, and they were just like, because I used to work. Okay, so I worked at a place, and I'm not gonna say what it was or what it is, but I just remember like it was like I call him like a suit. Man, I could do a whole podcast on this
Sure.
guy. I'm not gonna say his name. It's a great story. Paywall one.
There you go.
So he said something like they had like a pay-per-view special they were gonna do, and I was kind of like, man, no one's gonna get this or something like that. And, which no one wants to hear that. It's not something. My advice. I was young, and I still do this now, but don't talk bad about the project when you're working on it, especially even if you know it sucks and everyone knows it sucks. The people higher up don't want to hear it, even though they probably know it sucks.
Right.
They were like, but I remember he said to me, he goes, the name of the product is the thing that will bring the people in.
Okay.
And that was not true at all. The name, and it's kind of like what we talked about in other podcasts, like when we talked about RoboCop last week. About how they've tried to remake RoboCop so many times. They tried creating, but it was like that first perfect movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm not trying to dick on anything anyone's working on. I mean, again, we're fans.
Oh, absolutely.
But you got to make something good. You can't just.
Yeah.
You can't just make a shitty sequel after and expect the same amount. What made the first one good, you totally forget that. Like, the brand name is not... The name of... the brand name's important, but what made the brand name good, you need to have those ingredients in it. You can't have... You can't just have Oreo and give him a Brillo pen and say, look, it's Oreo. And it's like, no, that's... There's no cream on that.
I don't... it's funny, because I go back and forth. Two things, I guess. One is... I thought, like, how are we going to talk about Blair Witch? Because when I talk about Blair Witch, I don't talk so much about the film as much as I talk about how I felt about it and the time in which it was released. Because the film itself is a pretty simple, straightforward thing. And
it's not that long.
Yes.
Right.
It's more of a phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie. It's an amazing marketing stunt, too. I mean, it
fired on all cylinders. The ending, I still think the ending was an amazing ending, where the guy is standing in the corner and you realize you have a vague recollection. Oh, I heard this before in the film, and you know where it's going. But so I didn't really know how I was going to talk about the film other than how I felt about the film, which is a weird way to talk about movies. But the second thing is I saw Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, on Electric Blair Witch. I saw it on DVD. I didn't see it in the theaters. I really liked it, and I'm willing to admit, like, years later, I was wrong, because I don't
you like it for different reasons.
Well, here's what I think. I liked the decision they made to go in a completely different direction, and I remember thinking at the time, I was like, that's kind of cool, because rather than going back to the well, they're trying something different. And it didn't work, in my mind. But
I appreciate that they did say, okay, well, we're going to make a movie this time.
Yeah.
They just, I guess, forgot to make a
good version of that. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I do know, though, that if you asked me to think of like a couple, a dozen or so films that really defined an era, or that were like culturally relevant in some way, and this sounds weird even saying this out loud, but like, Easy Rider is kind of a perfect movie of that time, and it evokes an era and whatnot.
The imagery behind it. And...
Yeah. Maybe 2001 was like a certain, and there are movies like that. Star Wars was maybe a movie of its time, or you could look at, some of the old 1950s movies. But like Blair Witch is one of those movies. Blair Witch Project, the original one. It's an iconic film that's of its time, and it shifted the way things are done. And that's such a remarkable thing.
And when we talked to him, like, it's the perfect storm. It happened at the perfect time. It's like, you didn't have YouTube yet. You didn't really have social media yet.
Right.
You had websites, and you had AOL, you had chat rooms, and all that stuff. It wasn't even 2000 yet. We didn't even get... I don't think the first iPod was out yet.
Right, I don't think so.
The first iPod comes out in, 2001?
Yeah, because I
2002?
bought my wife an iPod when it first came out, and we met after 2001.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the perfect. It came, like you said, it came at the right time. It hit the iron when it was like it. Now the sequel, and again, I only seen clips of it.
Oh,
I just heard. I mean, I to say it's bad. I could be wrong. I could go home and watch this movie now. I think it's the best movie. I'm just going by what I heard.
Sure.
And the fact that it kind of killed the brand for a while.
It did. Yeah.
Now, if I were to make a sequel to that movie, and I was to say this takes place in the real world, well, I would be like, I would do something with the people who found the tape, the investigators. And let's say the people who found the tape, and then they investigate it.
Yeah.
And then they enter the world of the Blair Witch more. And you explore that. So I don't know, what the hell did they do in the Blair Witch 2? Like, from what I heard, it's so removed from the first one. Is that true?
Those... Yeah, and look, this was a long time ago I saw this. If I remember right, it was kind of like that... I think it was a Halloween movie, or maybe even a New Nightmare movie. The one where they talked about...
the one where Freddy is a demon.
Yeah, but
like making movies about like John Carpenter makes the movies to
it's very
quiet
meta.
The demon.
Yeah, it's very meta.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, that's kind of the approach Blair Witch took. I'm kicking myself now because I did want to talk with Ben while he was here. Is that the one thing Blair Witch Project did and Video Palace did is they kind of cracked the nut of. Cracked the riddle. They solved the problem of like first person narratives. Like generally, if I sit down and you're reading a book and it's like, when I was a young man, you know that the guy's going to live at the end because he's telling you the story,
right?
And that's kind of like a weird. Even little kids know that. They're like, well, of course he turned out fine. He's telling you the story.
He's like, I've been a ghost the whole time.
Right? Yeah. Unless it's some sort of hacky thing. But the Blair Witch Project. And Video Palace, the podcast that he did recently, they solved that problem because they were found footage,
right.
and that's such a unique way of telling a story that you don't know what's going to happen yet, and the narrator is unreliable, and you don't even know where the narrator is currently. I mean, it's a weird.
Have you ever seen? I want to wrap this up soon, but have you seen the VHS movies?
Yes, the first one, not the... They made 2, right?
They made 2, and then they made like a third one, I think, that was like YouTube videos or something.
Okay, I saw the first one.
Okay. Well, they're pretty fucked up.
Oh,
the second one's got some fucked up ones, too.
Yeah.
I highly recommend them, and I feel like that could have been a good way to do a Blair Witch sequel. Those movies came out many years later.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, like, that's what I would have done. Again, I'm not a creator of movies.
Different genre, yeah.
But I'm saying, like, I was shocked. Like, that, it's like the same thing when they made Cloverfield. I was, like, waiting for the sequel to Cloverfield. And if I were to make a movie that was a sequel to Cloverfield, I would, like, it's like you're handing the baton to somebody. The first movie is a video, found footage, and you say the second movie is not found footage movie but an action movie. Well, to connect the two, I would be like, okay, well, this movie's about the people who found the tape,
right,
or found the video, and you grow from there, and then you could go further in because now it's a movie, and you could get real crazy and deeper into the story, and not have to worry about looking like a documentary.
Right. That would have been good.
I never see that though. I've seen found footage movies, like, and they do sequels, and they just, like, I mean, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I just think that would be a natural way to do it. It'd be like the way to make a sequel is to, like, continue the story. It's like,
I always hear
I'm Detective John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, and I found
this tape or whatever.
Tape. Now, the fact that his name's John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt is the reason why I don't make movies.
It's probably, yes, right.
His name's mine name, too. Whenever we go out, people always shout.
Yeah, that shit writes
John
itself.
Jingleheimer Schmidt.
Well, we'll wrap this up now. But let me say this. You haven't listened to Video Palace yet.
No.
It's
So I'm
amazing.
completely
Look,
into it.
you could listen to it in like 2.5, 3 hours. It's
Cool.
the whole 10 episodes. It's on Apple
I'll definitely give it a
Podcasts.
listen.
It's really good, and it's not the same as Blair Witch, but it's a thematically similar. And I watched the first season of Ben's 20 Seconds to Live, and he said the second season is coming out. Real good stuff, and he's just a good guy. You know, anytime you can support a creator out there doing his thing, living his dream, then that's a good thing. And
No, it's
Yeah.
awesome. I'm glad we were able to get him on.
yes,
You know, obviously we're going to keep continuing what we do.
oh yeah,
And yeah, we'll try to bring on guests when it makes sense, and
yep.
try to, who knows? Maybe we could do like one episode as a guest, and next episode,
Yeah.
maybe 2 episodes a week. I don't know. We'll figure
Yeah.
that out. But yeah, it was awesome. It was great talking to him.
I'm Joseph K.
I'm Rob Israel.
We're still going on about
That. Thank you for listening to You Still Going On About That with myself, Rob Israel, and Joseph K. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Google Play, CastBox, and Podbean. So remember to like and subscribe, share, comment, leave us a basket of fruit or candy. Thank you for listening. All right, later. Bye.